Shalom and welcome to Nazarene Israel. My name is Norman Willis, and this is our Midrash for Parashat Ki Tavo. And we're going to talk about what would it be like if the judgment was to happen today. And I was praying about what does Yahweh want to say to his people in this parasha. And what I got was, you know how the judgment kind of seems so very far away, like it's never going to get here. So it never really comes to the top of our list, never really comes to the top of our plate. We never really stop to think about, how do I get right with Yahweh first? How do I seek his kingdom first? So that's what we're going to talk about, Father willing, this week. Now, briefly, we talk about every week, what did Yahweh want? He wanted a single family of man that loved each other, took care of each other, so that together they could hear his voice and serve him together as a single family of man. And Yahweh still wants that. And that's the purpose of the script, is to bring us about to where we're able to affect that. The problem was, we talked about before, mankind, we didn't want to live up to our full spiritual potential, so we fell down into animalism. Well, Yahweh began to redeem us little by little. We had Noah, who obeyed to save his physical family, Abraham, who obeyed even though it cost him his father's home and his father's house. But he started 3 patriarchs in motion, including Ishmael, who will come back in during the millennium. But then we had Judah and Joseph, and Moshe was used to bring us out of Egypt and to form us into a nation. And that's what we're talking about in context in these parashiot in Deuteronomy, is we're poised, getting ready to go into the land as a nation. And then we're getting ready to settle land as a nation. Can anyone see the parallels for the house of Joseph today? King David, exceptional character. He started his kingdom, or his Malchut. Judah is still walking out the Malchut pathway. And David also had the Sukkot David, the tabernacle of David, by which the Gentiles would be brought back into the nation of Israel. And the son of David, Yeshua, began what could effectively be called a Sukkot David nation. We would be in the dispersion. We wouldn't have our own land, but we were yet to be a nation. We were yet to become a people. And we were scattered. We were in Esau's house for a long time. But now we're coming to an awareness of who we are, so that we can organize ourselves, so that we can come together with our brothers in the house of Judah. Speaks about this in Yehezkel, or Ezekiel 37. We've already seen Judah has fulfilled verse 16. Judah has already taken his stick. Judah is already back in the land of Israel. Now the ball is in Ephraim's court. Now the command is to take another stick and write on it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Israel, his companions. Once that's done, brethren, we will be joined together with our brothers and sisters in Judah in the land. But we must form this organization first. We cannot go home without fulfilling this verse, this passage of prophecy. It just doesn't work like that. So, brethren, how do we fulfill this passage of prophecy? And this is what I just wonder if people even know what they're reading. Because do they understand what Yeshua came to do? Do they understand that Yeshua came as one like Moshe to show us how to walk out the Torah of Moshe in such a way that it would build a kingdom here on this earth? So Ephraimites, we're always so excited. We're going to start a new organization. We're going to start a stick of Joseph. We're going to make up our own rules for the stick of Joseph. We don't have to do any of that, brethren. We shouldn't do any of that. We're told what to do right here in the pages of the renewed covenant. Yehuda, or Jude, there's only one chapter, verse 3. He says, "Beloved, well, I was very diligent to write to you concerning our common salvation." I'm not arguing. I'm not saying you're not saved. That's not what I'm saying. Okay. Even though you're saved, because we have a common salvation, yet I still found it necessary to write to you, exhorting you to contend earnestly for the faith which was once for all delivered to the saints. Brothers and sisters, how many of us are doing that? Okay, brother, sister, are you earnestly contending for the faith which was once for all delivered to the saints? You're learning about it. Are you earnestly contending for it? Are you trying to help expand the kingdom that way? Well, if we're going to expand Yeshua's kingdom, if we're going to take the stick of Joseph, then we should obey Yeshua's rules. So Yeshua said in his very first sermon in the Beatitudes, Matthew chapter 5, right at the start of his ministry, he said, "Do not think that I came to destroy the Torah or the prophets." And of course, what does Asaph teach? That Yeshua did come to do that. Yeshua says, "I did not come to destroy the Torah or the prophets, but only in fulfillment of part of them. Because surely I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, nothing at all is going to fall from the Torah until everything that's prophesied in the Torah has been fulfilled." It's not, Elohim's not going to give a word and it's going to come back void. That doesn't happen. Verse 19, "Whoever therefore breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven." And for the house of Ephraim, verse 20, "For I say to you that unless your righteousness," meaning your performance of the Torah commandments, "exceeds the righteousness or exceeds the performance of the Torah commandments of the scribes and the Pharisees," meaning the Karaites and the rabbis, "you will by no means enter into the kingdom of heaven," because you won't be establishing the kingdom of heaven. You'll be establishing your own kingdom, because the only way to establish the kingdom of heaven is to obey Elohim's commandments. Elohim's commandments, those are what builds Elohim's kingdom. Go figure, who knew? So, brothers and sisters, the question we need to ask ourselves today is, if the judgment was now, we came to meet Yahweh and he said, "Did you read my book? Did you do everything that it said?" Would we really measure up? That's the question for this parashah. And let's use the honor system with ourselves as we go through, come along with this teaching. So we come now to our Torah portion. And in context, we've been talking about nation building. And in the context of a nation, it's important to know that in the Israelite nation, you've got four main roles: the king, the priest, the prophet, and the anointed judge. Two of those are leaders of armies. The king is the head of the temporal army. The priest is the head of the spiritual army. And those two armies, they're supposed to work hand in hand. They're supposed to work together, just as we see all throughout the Torah. But just like any army, it's going to need support. So that's why Yahweh says in Deuteronomy, or Devarim, chapter 26 and verse 1, he says, "And it shall be when you come into the land which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you as an inheritance, and you possess it and dwell in it, you're going to need some kind of governance." You're not going to have a physical kingship at first, but from the very start, we will have a priesthood, which is a spiritual army, a spiritual government. So this is the Torah government study, and we have the chapter on the first tithe called "How Yahweh Provides for His Feasts." We could also title it "How Yahweh Provides for His Spiritual Army." Verse 2, he says, "When you come into the land which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you, then you shall take some of the first of all of the produce of the ground, which you shall bring from your land that Yahweh your Elohim is giving you, and put it in a basket, and go to the place where Yahweh your Elohim chooses to make his name abide." And the assumption here that we're working with is that what Yahweh wants is he wants a nation full of people who want to establish a brotherhood that's going to live by the rules in the Torah that he established. So that's who the Torah is for. And you talk with people all the time, they're not interested in establishing a government like Yahweh wants. They're not interested in establishing this kind of a brotherhood. It's like, well, what are you here for? And typically they're here for the free gift, or they're here for the promises, or they're here for something, but they're not here for Yahweh because they're not doing what Yahweh said. And that's a big problem. So come to verse 3, and Yahweh says, and you shall go to the one who is priest in those days. And we'll talk about that. And say to him, I declare today to Yahweh your Elohim that I have come to the country which Yahweh swore to our fathers to give us. Okay, so Yahweh upheld his part of the bargain. Okay. Then the priest shall take the basket out of your hand and set it down before the altar of Yahweh your Elohim. Now notice what's happening before we change slides. He's supposed to go to the one who is priest. And you get this misconception all the time because there's just really a strong, and I don't know exactly where it comes from, except to say the red horse, but there's a very strong anarchistic spirit in the house of Ephraim. And so people just think that the house of Levi is just going to mill around on the Temple Mount, and all the people are going to come up, and you're going to have your favorite priest, and you're going to give your offerings to your favorite priest, and somehow it's going to get miraculously distributed amongst the Levitical order, and all the functions are going to be fulfilled. And that's not how it works, and that's not how this verse reads. So what he's really saying here is, bring your tithes and offerings to effectively the high priest or his designee, because that's when it all goes to the high priest. Now the high priest can pay for all of the jobs, people who are performing the sacrifices, the showbread, the firewood, the water, they're doing the security, all the things that the priesthood has to do. The high priest needs control of those funds so the high priest can make the right things happen. So there's a procedure here that you have to figure out what Yahweh wants and figure out how it would work. But when we come to the land, we shall answer and say before Yahweh our Elohim, my father was a Syrian, or an Aramean, about to perish. And he went down to Mitzrayim, or Egypt, and dwelt there, few in number. And there he became a nation great, mighty, and populous. But the Egyptians mistreated us, afflicted us, and laid hard bondage on us. Verse 7, then we cried out to Yahweh Elohim of our fathers, and Yahweh heard our voice and looked on our affliction and our labor and our oppression. So Yahweh brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and with an outstretched arm, with great terror and with signs and wonders. Verse 9, and he has brought us to this place and has given us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And now, therefore, behold, Yahweh did what he said he would do. Therefore, I have brought the first fruits of the land, which you, O Yahweh, have given me. Then you shall set it before Yahweh your Elohim and worship before Yahweh your Elohim. So what's happening here is Yahweh saying to worship before him, you have to take part in this cycle where he's providing for us and we're providing for his priesthood. And the priesthood gives us a means or a mechanism by which we can make clean tithes, sacrifices, and offerings. Now we come to the Beatitudes. Yeshua is speaking about this exact same kind of spirit of wanting to establish a brotherhood that wants to see Elohim's kingdom built. So he says, Matthew chapter 6 and verse 19, he says, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. Don't worry about the size of your bank accounts. Don't worry about your 401k plan. Don't worry about owning the crown jewels, but rather lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And that just means that when you love something, that's where you spend your time and that's where you spend your money. So, for example, if you love your family, you probably spend your time and your money with your family. If you love sailing, Father forbid, then you probably spend your time and your money sailing. So, brothers and sisters, the question is, how much money do we spend on the kingdom of Elohim? How much of our time do we spend on the kingdom of Elohim. Verse 22, the lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is good, meaning you're generous toward the things of Elohim and toward your brothers and sisters in Israel, then your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, meaning you're stingy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? And just a question, brothers and sisters, is our eye good or is our eye not good? Are we happy to spend our time and our money on the things of Elohim and his kingdom? Or does it bother us? Are we perturbed at the thought of spending our time and our money on the things of Elohim and his kingdom? Are we here for him or are we just here for the free gift? Verse 24, Yeshua says, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. He says, you cannot serve Elohim and Mammon, meaning you can't try to get rich here in this earth and Elohim is pleased with you. It just doesn't happen. Okay. What Elohim wants to see is he wants to see us dedicating our walks to serving him and his son and building his son's kingdom in his absence, or he's not pleased. So we have to be very careful with ourselves and ask ourselves, are we helping to build his kingdom? Or are we not helping to build his kingdom, really? Come back to the Torah portion, Devarim 26 and verse 11. Yahweh says, so you shall rejoice in every good thing which Yahweh or Elohim has given to you and your house. Don't take the good things for granted. Now, it starts to get a little confusing here because that's why we clarified in the Torah government study. He says, you and the Levite and the stranger who is with you. So now in the Torah government study, we have the chapter on how Yahweh provides for his feasts or his priesthood. We also have the chapter on how Yahweh provides for his poor. And the thing I'd like to point out, I think Judah has a pretty good handle on taking care of their own poor. But the house of Ephraim, from what I have seen, there is not a focus or emphasis on being a nation, on being a people. And we don't do the things that a nation needs to do, such as establish a government, such as establish courts, such as take care of their own poor, these kinds of things. These are things that we need to do if we're going to please Elohim. These are Torah commandments, and he says them every week. So are we doing them? And if we can't do those specific commandments, are we truly attempting to keep the principles and the precepts? Or not really? So in the Torah government study, we have a few different tithing studies on the website, but in the Torah calendar, we talk about how there's a 7-year Shemitah land rest cycle, and then how the year of tithing is on the 3rd and the 6th years. So those are the years of tithing, an additional 3rd tithe for the poor. So the first tithe goes to support the spiritual army. It's just spiritual armies need support. The second tithe is for you and your family, so you're going to pay that, of course. So then it's just a question of the poor. So how much are we going to use to support the poor, and when are we going to give to the poor? And if the answer is never or not really, then we need to pay attention to what Yahweh's word has to say. So Yahweh says that we give an extra 3rd tithe in the 3rd year and in the 6th year. Now, when we're in the land, we talk about this in the study, when we're in the land, then the 6th year is a double crop or a bumper crop year. So I always count 3 years out of 7 if I'm going to prorate for the poor. So there's other people that they say, well, what do we do? We're not working an agricultural job, we're working a desk job. So we don't get a bumper crop in the 6th year. So what do we do? So there's arguments to be made both ways. I believe the technically correct argument is prorated 3/7, 4.29%, but there's an argument to be made for the 2.9%. But again, brothers and sisters, the question is, where is our heart? Are we trying to build Yahweh's kingdom? Are we trying to support his spiritual army? Are we helping to take care of our brethren? Or are we looking for excuses not to do that? That's the questions here. So we come to verse 12, and it says, when you have finished laying aside all the tithe of your increase in the third year, which is called the year of tithing, the third and the sixth years, because there's an extra third tithe, and have given it to the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, so that they may eat within your gates and be filled. And just a quick administrative comment. My understanding is that what they would do is they would collect the third tithe by your local city, and then the local city elders who knew the people would be the ones who would handle that distribution. So in the Melchizedekian order, the third tithe collection and distribution is typically handled by cities. But again, you don't just hand it to a stranger. You don't just hand it to a widow. You don't just hand it to a fatherless. What you do, as we talk about in the Torah government study, is that there will be a collection point, and then the Levites will oversee the distribution. That's how it was handled in ancient times. So once you have done that, once we have all said, our father was an Aramean, we went down few in number, and now there's many of us, then you shall say before Yahweh your Elohim, I have removed the set apart tithe from my house. Notice it's a set apart tithe. It's not optional. It's not up to us. And also have given them to the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. There'd be a collection point, according to all your commandments which you have commanded me. I have not transgressed your commandments, nor have I forgotten them. Now remember, this is when we're in the land, but what an incentive there is to transgress his commandments or to forget them. Verse 14, he says, I have not eaten any of it when in mourning, nor have I removed any of it for an unclean use. And if you don't pay the third tithe, then that's removing it for an unclean use. Nor have I given any of it for the dead. I have obeyed the voice of Yahweh my Elohim, and have done according to all that you have commanded me. So notice again, when we worship Yahweh, if we're going to, we can adore him without obeying him, but we can't worship him without obeying him. Verse 15, he says, look down from your set apart habitation from heaven and bless your people Israel and the land which you have given us, just as you swore to our fathers, a land flowing with milk and honey. And the commandments of the Levitical tithes do not apply in the dispersion, but you still have the same principles and the same precepts. You have people who want to establish the kind of a kingdom and want to establish the kind of a global brotherhood that Elohim wants, and then you have everyone else. Whether you're operating under the Levitical order, or you could call it the rabbinical order, or the order of kings and priests, what are we doing, brethren? Are we trying to help Elohim get the kingdom he wants, or are we not? So Shaul speaks to these in Galatim or Galatians chapter 6, starting in verse 7. He says, do not be deceived. Elohim is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. For he who sows to his flesh, which is what most people are doing, will of the flesh reap corruption. But he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life. And you don't have to worry. Yahweh's going to make sure you get your reward. Devarim 26 and verse 16 says, this day Yahweh your Elohim commands you to observe these statutes and judgments. Therefore you shall be careful to observe them with all of your heart and with all of your soul. And that means both as individuals and as a corporate body, as the nation of Israel. Verse 17, he says, today you have proclaimed Yahweh to be your Elohim. Do we know what it means that Yahweh is our Elohim? That you will walk in his ways and keep his statutes, his commandments and his judgments, and that you will obey his voice. And once again, every week, it's Judah, brother, it's walk in his ways, not your own ways. Keep his statutes, commandments, and judgments, not the ones in the Talmud, and that you obey his voice and not your own voice. And Ephraim, if we're going to call him our Elohim, then reading does not equal obeying. Ephraim agrees to read his voice, but Ephraim doesn't yet do his voice. Okay, well, that's not really having an Elohim. Verse 18, also today Yahweh has proclaimed you to be his special people, just as he promised you that you should keep all his commandments. It means every one of us, it means individually and corporately, and that he will set you high above all nations, which he has made, in praise, in name, in honor, and that you may be a set-apart people to Yahweh or Elohim, just as he has spoken. But notice in verse 19, in order to become a set-apart people to Yahweh our Elohim, verse 18, we have to keep all of his commandments, not just the easy ones, not just the ones we like. Chapter 27 and verse 1, now Moshe with the elders of Israel commanded the people, saying, keep all the commandments which I command you today. We say it every week. And it shall be on the day when you cross over the Yarden to the land which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you, that you shall set up for yourselves large stones and whitewash them with lime. Verse 3, and you shall write on them all the words of this Torah. So we're talking about the written Torah of Moshe. We're not talking about an oral Torah, because it says you shall write on them all the words of this Torah when you have crossed over, that you may enter the land which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you, a land flowing with milk and honey, just as Yahweh Elohim of your fathers has promised you. Verse 4, therefore it shall be when you have crossed over the Yarden, that on Mount Ebal you shall set up these stones which I command you today, and you shall whitewash them with lime. Once again, verse 8, and you shall write very plainly on the stones all the words of this written Torah. No mention is made of the Torah Shebaal Peh. There's no such thing as an oral Torah in the written Torah of Moshe. Verse 9, then Moshe and the priests, the Levites, spoke to all Israel, saying, take heed and listen, O Israel. This day you have become the people of Yahweh your Elohim. Okay, he's calling us together as a nation, both Judah and Joseph at this point. So we become one nation as the people of Yahweh our Elohim. Therefore, we shall obey his voice, obey the voice of Yahweh your Elohim, and observe his commandments and his statutes, which he commands us that day. Verse 17, he says, cursed is the one who moves his neighbor's landmark. And all the people shall say, Amen. Cursed is the one who makes the blind to wander off the road. And the people shall say, Amen. And cursed is the one who perverts the justice due to the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. And all the people shall say, Amen. And forgive me, Levi, but I just couldn't help but marvel at this. So in effect, verse 17, cursed is the one who moves his neighbor's landmark, and there's a concerted effort on the house of Judah's part to erase all heritages for the house of Joseph. That's not moving Joseph's landmark. And then cursed is the one who makes the blind to wander off the road. And I was just thinking, okay, don't the rabbis consider us blind? And so rather than trying to help us, they're just going to curse us, because we know from Kol HaTorah, they've known who we are for at least 200 years. Yet they're not trying to help us recover our identity. They're trying to take us away from Tanakh and plunge us into Talmud. Verse 19, cursed is the one who perverts the justice due the stranger, the ger, the fatherless, and the widow. And all the people shall say, Amen. And I guess I just wonder, perverts the justice due to the stranger, that's Joseph, because Joseph right now is a ger, not a goy, but a ger. And Judah has known that Joseph is Joseph for the past 200 years. So where is the justice of bringing Joseph back to the written Torah? Verse 26, cursed is the one who does not confirm all the words of this Torah. And all the people shall say, Amen. And the written Torah is all about establishing a single family of man. It's about establishing a single brotherhood of 12 tribes and 2 houses. Eventually, Ishmael will get wrapped in. But in order for it to work, brothers, we have to do all the words of the Torah. Even if you're under the renewed covenant, it's a renewed covenant. It's not a replacement covenant. It's a renewed covenant. If we want to be blessed, we have to confirm all the words of this Torah. And that doesn't mean just reading it and ignoring it. That means reading it and starting to do it, reading it and starting to conform our lives to the pattern and the examples that are going to help build a better world for Yahweh and his Son. Chapter 28 and verse 1 says, now it shall come to pass, if you diligently obey the voice of Yahweh your Elohim, to observe carefully all his commandments, which I command you today, meaning do everything Yahweh says to do, that Yahweh your Elohim will set you high above all nations of the earth. And all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you because you obey the voice of Yahweh your Elohim. You're going to obey the voice of Yahweh. You're not going to be able to get away from the blessings. The blessings are going to overtake you. Most people I know, they're scared to bless Yahweh because they're afraid Yahweh's not going to give them anything back. When you bless Yahweh, Yahweh's blessings will overtake you. You won't be able to run away from them. Verse 3, blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the country. Verse 4, blessed shall be the fruit of your body, the produce of your ground, and the increase of your herds, the increase of your cattle, and the offspring of your flocks. You'd think I was preaching prosperity doctrine. Verse 5, blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall you be when you come in, and blessed shall you be when you go out. And Yahweh will cause your enemies who rise against you to be defeated from before your face. They shall come out against you one way and flee from before you 7 ways. Yahweh will command the blessing on you in your storehouses and in all to which you set your hand. And he will bless you in the land which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you. Yahweh will establish you as a set-apart people to himself, just as he has sworn to you, if you keep the commandments of Yahweh your Elohim and walk in all his ways. And brothers and sisters, this is so very plain. It's so very simple. Are we keeping the commandments of Elohim and walking in all of his ways? Or are we doing something less than that? It's a wonderful thing to tell yourself the truth. Verse 10, then all the peoples of the earth shall see that you are called by the name of Yahweh. That doesn't just mean use a magic 4-letter combination. That's not what that means. It means that you're walking in the fame of Yahweh. You're walking in the way of Yahweh. You're trying to become like Yahweh. You're trying to become like Yeshua. And they shall be afraid of you. Yahweh will grant you plenty of goods in the fruit of your body, in the increase of your livestock, in the produce of your ground, in the land which Yahweh swore to your fathers to give to you. And one of the problems is people just don't believe this blessings. We got a bunch of believing atheists running around. Okay, do we believe that Yahweh has the power to do this? Verse 12, Yahweh will open to you his good treasure, the heavens, to give the rain to your land in its season, and to bless all the work of your hand. You shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow. Verse 13, and Yahweh will make you the head and not the tail, and you shall be above only and not be beneath, if you heed the commandments of Yahweh your Elohim, which I command you today, and are careful to observe or to keep or to do them, to shomer them. Verse 14, so you shall not turn aside from any of the words which I command you this day, to the right or to the left, to go after other Elohim to serve them. And let's be straightforward about this, brothers and sisters. That's what's really going on. If we're not serving Yahweh, we're doing something else, that's because we're not serving Yahweh or Elohim. We're serving a different Elohim. That's the real deal. And if that's the case, verse 17, he says, cursed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. You're not going to be able to get away from the curses. Cursed shall be the fruit of your body and the produce of your land, the increase of your cattle and the offspring of your flocks. Yahweh's going to make sure that you shall be cursed when you come in and cursed when you go out, because he wants to make sure that you get the point. Verse 20, Yahweh will send on you cursing, confusion, and rebuke in all that you set your hand to do, until you are destroyed and until you perish quickly because of the wickedness of your doings in which you have forsaken me. Yahweh will make the plague cling to you until he has consumed you from the land which you are going to possess. And I guess once again, the question is, do we believe that Yahweh has the power to do this? Do we believe that Yahweh has the power to make things go well for us if we obey him, or not well for us if we disobey him? Verse 22, if we disobey him, if we just don't keep everything he says to do, he says, Yahweh will strike you with consumption, with fever, with inflammation, with severe burning fever, with the sword, with scorching, and with mildew. They shall pursue you until you perish, and your heavens, which are over your head, shall be bronze, and the earth, which is under you, shall be iron. Yahweh will change the rain of your land to powder and dust. From the heaven it shall come down on you until you are destroyed, because you didn't have a heart to help Yahweh get what he wanted. Basically, verse 25, Yahweh will cause you to be defeated from before your enemies. You shall go out one way against them and flee 7 ways from before them. You shall become troublesome to all the kingdoms of the earth. Your carcasses shall be food for all the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and no one shall frighten them away, because we're not obeying the words of Yahweh. Verse 27, Yahweh will strike you with the boils of Egypt, with tumors, with the scab, and with the itch, from which you cannot be healed. Yahweh will strike you with madness and blindness and confusion of heart. Verse 29, and you shall grope at noonday as a blind man gropes in darkness, and you shall not prosper in your ways. You shall be only oppressed and plundered continually, and no one shall save you, because you didn't want to obey all of the words of Yahweh, and he figures lukewarm people hate him. So this is how it goes. This is what happens. Drop down to verse 45. Moreover, all these curses shall come upon you and pursue you and overtake you until you are destroyed, because you did not obey the voice of Yahweh your Elohim to keep his commandments and his statutes, which he commanded you. So once again, brethren, the question would have to be, are we keeping all of his commandments today? So we're looking at Matthew 24. We're looking at the end times. So what do we believe? Do we believe these words of Yahweh? Verse 58, he says, if you do not carefully observe all the words of this Torah that are written in this book, once again, there's no mention of a Torah Sheba al Peh. There's no oral Torah in the Torah Moshe. That you may fear this glorious and awesome name, Yahweh or Elohim. Then Yahweh will bring upon you and your descendants in these end times extraordinary plagues. He says, great and prolonged plagues, and serious and prolonged sicknesses. Verse 60, moreover, he will bring back on you all the diseases of Egypt, of which you were afraid, and they shall cling to you. Verse 61, also every sickness and every plague which is not written in this book of the Torah will Yahweh bring upon you until you are destroyed. And just to comment, so Yeshua is speaking about the plagues in the end times. So Luke chapter 21, starting in verse 10, Yeshua said to them, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. And there will be great earthquakes in various places and famines and pestilences. There will be fearful sights and great signs from heaven. So we come to chapter 29 and verse 1, and it says, these are the words of the covenant which Yahweh commanded Moshe to make with the children of Israel in the land of Moab, besides the covenant which he made with them in Horeb. So he made the covenant in Horeb with the fathers, and then this is at the end of the 40 years he's making. It's the same covenant. He's refreshing or renewing the covenant, not the renewed covenant, but he's also making this covenant with them in the land of Moab. So now we come to our Haftarah prophetic portion. And again, I want to be respectful in the way that we say this, but we don't understand the rabbinical procedure regarding the 10 weeks surrounding Tisha B'Av. Just quickly recap, there's 3 weeks of rebuke before Tisha B'Av, which commemorates the destruction of the Second Temple. But they don't change anything. They continue with the rabbinical program instead of going back to the Tanakh. So then you have 7 weeks of consoling. Judah consoles himself without having changed anything. So Judah basically, and then they go reading right past all the prophecies that tell them what they should be changing. And then they're going to blunder right into the same thing all over again. So here we have the 7 Haftarot of consolation. And we can see that it jumps from, again, Isaiah 40 to 49 to 51, then to 54, 55, then back to 51, 52. Everything's all chopped up and moved around, so you don't really get a flow of what's truly happening in prophecy here. Then it jumps ahead to 54, which we read last week, but we saw that they cut out 53 in the last 3 verses of 52. So we restored those last week. Now we come to chapter 60, and of course, we breeze right past what's in 56, 57, 58, 59, all the things that Judah should be doing to guarantee success and survival right now. Judah's just going to read right past them. La, 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 la. We don't care. That's not us. And then next week, we'll see the final petting. Here's why we didn't read this. So Yeshayahu, or Isaiah 59 in verse 20, it tells us, the Redeemer will come to Zion. You could argue physical Zion or spiritual Zion there. And to those who turn away from transgression in Yaakov, says Yahweh. So that means if you turn away from your Torah breaking, if you turn away from your Talmud keeping and go back to the written Torah of Moshe, the Redeemer will come, says Yahweh. So here's part of the cherry-picked verse. This is what Judah wants to get to. So Yeshayahu 60, starting in verse 1, says, arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of Yahweh is risen upon you. For behold, darkness shall cover the earth. It's going to be very difficult in these times. And deep darkness, or gross darkness, the people themselves are going to have very dark spirits in this time. But Yahweh will arise over you, and his glory will be seen upon you. Now, again, just for context, so I don't know if you can see my mouse, but up here in the top row, we have the yellow rectangle. That's seal 6. We're waiting for the sky to recede like a scroll at seal 6. We're going to see several other verses. And then Isaiah 60, this is speaking after the seals, after the trumpets, after the cup judgments. Then you have Armageddon and the ingathering. And the ingathering, that's the time frame that Yeshayahu 60 is talking about here. So, verse 3, it says, the Gentiles in the ingathering shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising. Verse 4, lift up your eyes all around and see. They all gather together. They come to you. Your sons shall come from afar, and your daughters shall be nursed at your side. This is a remez, or a hint, that we're talking about Israelites here. So there's more than one group, there's more than one population in this chapter. But right here, we're saying, your Israelite sons and daughters will return. Verse 5, then you shall see and become radiant, and your heart shall swell with joy, because the abundance of the sea shall be turned to you. The wealth of the Gentiles shall come to you. And could be a play on words here, but we come to Strong's Hebrew Concordance 669. This is Ephraim's name. So it's a dual masculine of 672, meaning doubly fruitful or prodigiously fruitful. So this is Ephraim coming home. So praise Yahweh, Judah is looking forward to Ephraim coming home. Except why then does Judah have the B'nai Noach program in place to stop Ephraim from coming home? So we come to Yeshayahu 16, verse 8. It says, who are these who fly like a cloud and like doves to their roosts? This is returning Ephraim coming home because they're coming home to their roost. Okay, we're also talking about doves. We come to Hosea chapter 7 and verse 11, tells us, again a hint, Ephraim also is like a silly dove, lacking sense or lacking heart. Because rather than dig in and do the right thing, we call to Egypt and we go to Assyria. But so Yahweh says, wherever they go, wherever Ephraim goes, I will spread my net on them. I will bring them down like birds of the air, and I will chastise them according to what their congregation has heard. Let's read it again. I will chastise them according to what their congregation has heard. Okay, brothers and sisters, do you know you're supposed to be listening for Yahweh's voice and keeping all of his commandments so that he will feel loved and not hated? Okay, if you heard listening to this broadcast that Yahweh wants us to hear his voice and do everything he says, including everything that's been written down, because we're responsible for everything Yahweh's ever said. Okay, have you heard that? Okay, you're responsible for that. Moving on. Verse 9. Surely the coastlands, faraway nations, shall wait for me, and the ships of Tarshish will come first to bring your sons of Israel from afar, not B'nai Noach, their silver and their gold with them, because Ephraim is doubly prodigious, doubly fruitful, to the name of Yahweh your Elohim, and to the set apart one of Israel, because he has glorified you. Verse 10, now the sons of foreigners shall build up your walls, and their kings shall minister to you. For in my wrath I struck you, but in my favor I have had mercy on you. Therefore your gates shall be open continually. They shall not be shut day or night, that men may bring to you the wealth of the Gentiles and their kings in procession. Verse 12, for the nation and kingdom which will not serve Judah shall perish, and those nations shall be utterly ruined. The glory of the Lebanon shall come to you, the cypress, the pine, and the box tree together, to beautify the place of my sanctuary, and I will make the place of my feet glorious. Verse 14, also the sons of those who afflicted you shall come bowing down to you, and all those who despised you shall fall prostrate at the soles of your feet. And they shall call you the city of Yahweh, Zion of the set apart one of Israel. Verse 15, whereas you have been forsaken and hated, so that no one went through you, I will make you an eternal excellence, a joy of many generations. Verse 21, it says, also your people shall all be righteous. That means they will all keep all of the Torah commandments in the Torah Moshe, just like Yeshua said. They shall inherit the land forever, the branch of my planting, the work of my hands, that I may be glorified. So now we come to our Brit Chadasha renewed covenant portion. And in Luke chapter 22, starting in verse 24, there was a dispute among Yeshua's servants as to which one of them should be considered the greatest. So the king said to his servants, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them. They're playing king of the hill. They're working the alpha male dominance hierarchy. And those who exercise authority over them are called benefactors. But if you're rich and powerful, you rule. If you're not rich and powerful, you serve. Verse 26, Yeshua says, but it shall not be so among you. On the contrary, he who is greatest among you, let him be as the younger or the lesser, and he who governs, let him be as the one who serves. For who is greater, he who sits at the table or he who serves? Is it not he who sits at the table and is served? Yet I am among you as the one who serves. And this is the principle. We just have, I don't know how to help people understand this. So we've all seen the Egyptian all-seeing eye and the pyramid. And within the pyramidal structure, the rich and powerful elites are on the top, and then everyone else serves them. Everyone else is under them, and authority flows downhill. Yeshua is not like that. It's not a dead stone pyramid. It's a living tree structure. So you have Yeshua, who is the strongest of us all. He's down there in the most difficult position. There's no light, it's dark, but he's faithfully sending up nutrients, he's sending up moisture so that the rest of the tree can live. And then the idea is that everyone else will understand that this is a framework that we're supposed to plug ourselves into. And those who love Yeshua and those who want to see Yeshua get his kingdom, seeing as he's our husband to be after all, those will be rewarded with a portion of the kingdom. And those who don't want to involve themselves in the tree, who don't want to plug themselves into the growth framework, they won't be plugged in. They'll be cut off from the vine, as it were, and will be withered. So this is Yeshua's plan. And by actively engaging in Yeshua's plan, not only do we build his kingdom, but we also establish a kingdom for ourselves to belong to so that we can serve in it as our husband rules and reigns. Well, there's a certain structure in a stick that I think our people are not understanding necessarily. So again, we broke away from King Rehoboam, we broke away from the Roman church, we broke away from the Lutheran church, we broke away from the mainstream church, we broke away. So, but do we understand the value of joining and belonging at this point? So that's the question. Now, continue. So Luke 22 and verse 28, spoiler alert, this is the Red Horse version. But you are those who have not had any trials because of me. You've had a broad, easy road life, and I bestow upon you a church, just as my Father bestowed a church upon me, that you may eat and drink at my table in my church and sit on thrones judging the 12 messianic assemblies of Israel. It doesn't say that. Okay, so now let's try the Babylonian version. But you are those who have voted in the same precinct with me, and I bestow upon you a democracy, just as my Father bestowed a democracy upon me, that you may eat and drink at my table in my democracy and sit in electoral colleges voting for who's going to belong in the 12 tribes of Israel. No, it's not that either. And I just wonder if our people are capable anymore of understanding what it really says here. Verse 28, Yeshua says, but you are those who have continued with me in my trials. Okay, you're looking for something for free you're not here to start with. You're looking to get something and you don't want to give anything back. You're not even in the conversation. You're not here to start with. Okay, these are the disciples who have continued with him in his trials. They're giving. Where their treasure is, there their heart is also. The ones who have made a commitment, the ones who have bought in. Verse 29, he says, I bestow upon you a kingdom, just as my Father bestowed a kingdom upon me. And the funny thing about a kingdom is they don't take popular votes. They don't. That's not how it is. In this kingdom, we're listening for Elohim's voice. And those who hear Elohim's voice, they then share that information with others. And it's up to us to figure out not whether to vote on whether or not we like what Elohim says, or whether or not we're going to do what Elohim says. It's up to us in fear to understand that if we want any part of Elohim's kingdom, then we need to submit to his voice. We need to obey it. And then we need to submit one to another in the spirit, and we need to obey it. And scripture is always, there's always either a single leader or a small group of leaders, and there's order between them. So he says that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, which is ruled by his voice, and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And the word judge has taken a bad rap for reasons we don't have time to go in here, but to judge just means to establish the correct situations for the 12 tribes of Israel. Verse 31, and the master said, Shimon, Shimon, indeed Hasatan has asked for you that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith should not fail. And when you have returned to me, meaning when you're loyal and faithful and focused on me once again, strengthen your brethren. Notice he didn't say get a kingdom for yourself. He didn't say use your powers for yourself. He didn't say get a bunch of money for yourself. He said put your brethren first. Strengthen your brethren. Consider the nation before you think about yourself. So we drop down to verse 70. We see that the Sanhedrin thought that they had Yeshua caught and trapped in blasphemy. They all said, are you then the son of Elohim? So he said to them, you rightly say that I am. And they said, what further testimony do we need? We have heard this blasphemy ourselves from Yeshua's own mouth. And Judah has continued in this pattern until this very day, just assuming that Mashiach Nagid was not supposed to be a divine Mashiach. Let's take a look again at what the scriptures have to say. So Daniel chapter 9 and verse 25 tells us that Mashiach Nagid would come 7 weeks and 62 weeks after a command went forth to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. So we see that the 7 weeks and 62 weeks was 483 years. So Mashiach Nagid would come 483 years after the command came to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. Okay, well, we have 3 possibilities here. One was the Edict of Cyrus, which would have brought Mashiach Nagid around 3704 or 56 BCE. No one showed up then. The number 2 option is King Darius's decree, which is approximately 3240, somewhere in there. And you add 483 years and you come out to 3723 or 3728, which is about 37 to 32 BCE. Again, no one came then. So then you have King Artashasta's decree. It was about 3303, and 483 years later corresponds exactly to Yeshua's arrival in 3786 or 26 CE. So those are the 3 possibilities. And we see in verse 26, after the 62 weeks, Mashiach shall be cut off, but not for himself. That's a perfect description of what happened to Yeshua. And the people of the prince who is to come, which is the Roman general Titus, shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And that is exactly what happened in 3830 or 70 CE. So this is Mashiach Nagid. Let's notice he was born in Beit Lechem Ephrathah, fulfilling Micah 5 and verse 2, which prophesies that out of Beit Lechem Ephrathah should come forth one to be the one to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth are from of old, from everlasting. So we come then to Daniel chapter 7 and verse 13, and we see that this is a very special anointed position. So I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. Coming with the clouds of heaven is normally reserved for deity. And he came to the Ancient of Days, who is deity, and they brought him near before him. So we know we're in the night visions, and we see one like a Son of Man coming in the clouds, coming to the Ancient of Days. That tells us this is not some ordinary man. This is not an ordinary Son of Man. Verse 14. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed. There's a lot more we could say about that. So we come to Tehillim, or Psalms 45, starting in verse 1, and we see that this psalm concerns the king. And verse 2 tells us that the king is fairer than the sons of men. Grace is poured out upon his lips, or favor. Therefore, Elohim has blessed him forever. So we see that there's a comparison. The king is fairer than the sons of men, and the sons of men are lacking in comparison. Verse 3, gird your sword upon your thigh, O mighty one, with your glory and your majesty. And in your majesty ride prosperously because of truth, humility, and righteousness. And your right hand shall teach you awesome things. Your arrows are sharp in the heart of the king's enemies. The peoples fall under you, which would seem to indicate an earthly kingdom. But then verse 6, he says, your throne, O Elohim, is forever and ever. A scepter of righteousness is the scepter of your kingdom. So we're talking about an Elohim with an earthly kingdom. Verse 7, you love righteousness and hate wickedness. Therefore, Elohim, your Elohim, has anointed you with the oil of gladness more than your companions. So we're seeing all sorts of evidence that points to a divine Mashiach, and yet Judah felt that they were justified in putting him to death, which is one main reason why they haven't changed. So in Luke 23 and verse 27, a great multitude of people followed Yeshua, and the women who also mourned and lamented him. But Yeshua, turning to them, said, daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children, because much worse is coming. Verse 29, for indeed the days are coming in which they will say, blessed are the barren, wombs that never bore, and breasts which never nursed. Those days are coming soon. Verse 30, then they will begin to say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. Okay, where have we seen that language before? So we come to Hosea, or Hosea chapter 10 and verse 7. And it says, and as for Samaria, which is another name for Joseph, in context, probably United States of America, as for Samaria, her king is cut off like a twig on the water. Verse 8, also the high places of Avon, the sin of Israel, shall be destroyed. The thorn and thistle shall grow on their altars. They shall say to the mountains, cover us, and to the hills, fall on us. Okay, so we're seeing a second tie point. So now we come to Revelation, Sodot, Hidgalut, chapter 6, starting in verse 14. It says, then the sky receded as a scroll when it's rolled up, and every mountain and island was moved out of its place. This is talking about nuclear war and then the establishment of a one world order, mountains being symbolic of governments and islands being symbolic of national borders. So every government and every national border was moved out of its place. Why? because the kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the commanders, the mighty men, every slave and every free man hid themselves in the caves and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand? This slide comes from Revelation of the End Times, or Revelation Simplified on YouTube. And the thing, again, to notice here is that what we're waiting for right now, we're at seal 6, waiting for the sky to recede like a scroll. Again, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but we're waiting for the sky to recede like a scroll. This is when scripture says that the people will say to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and cover us and hide us from the face of the Lamb, because the great day of his wrath has come. But it's not that. The great day of his wrath is more aptly described as the cup judgments or Armageddon, or the two put together. So again, people are going to be confused. They're going to think that this next war is going to be the tribulation when it's not. And that's going to cause a lot of people to lose their faith. But Yeshua is saying, don't weep for me. Yeshua's punishment, as horrible as it was over and done with in a matter of a day or two. We're looking at here many, many years of coming trials, tribulations, and troubles. Brothers and sisters, do we think we're going to get through these without giving Yahweh Elohim everything that he wants? Do we think it's going to be okay to continue turning a blind ear to Yahweh's commandments, and we're still going to get through okay? There's a big job to do. In Genesis, or Bereshit 35 and verse 11, Elohim told our mutual forefather Yaakov that he would father a great nation, meaning Judah, and a company of Judeo-Christian Josephite nations, and that there would be things to do for them. So all these Christian nations that are backing up the nation of Israel right now, here's where they come from. But how do we, brothers, what do we do, especially for the house of Ephraim? What do we do here? Okay, well, there's a study in the Nazarene Scripture Studies series called The Case of the Missing The. And there's this word the that's not translated from the Greek into English. And if you come here, it's Luke chapter 18 and verse 8. And what it says, take a look at the previous page. Nevertheless, the Son of Man, when he comes, will he find the faith on the earth? And most Asavite Bibles just say, no, just will he find faith? Will he find someone who believes? That's not what he's saying. He's saying, will he find the faith once delivered to the saints? Because there's very special things about that faith that's once for all delivered to the saints. Here you can see this, the interlinear version for that. And it's the persuasion, the faith once delivered to the saints. So Yehuda, or Jude 1 and verse 3 tells us that while Jude was very diligent to write to us because we have a common salvation, yet he found it necessary to exhort the Messianics and the Christians to contend, and because they didn't have Catholicism yet, to contend earnestly for the singular faith, the faith, which was once for all delivered to the saints. And the reason why, brothers and sisters, is there's certain special things about that faith. If we will obey that faith, if we will do the things the renewed covenant says to do, it will build a true stick of Ephraim. It will build a true stick of Joseph in the hand of Ephraim. All we have to do is do what Yeshua says to do. You know, how many people they're willing to build a stick of Ephraim, but they're not willing to do it by renewed covenant rules? Okay, well, what good is that? Why not just do what Yeshua says to do? And why not know that if we will dedicate and discipline ourselves to do what Yeshua says to do. It will build a stick of Joseph in the hand of Ephraim, and it will move Judah to jealousy. And not only that, we will be keeping the commandments better than the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Because why? Because we're following the instructions of Mashiach Nagid, one like Moses, who came to show us how to walk out the Torah. Even if we're not in the land, we still know exactly what to do. We just have to obey what Yeshua says to do. That's it. And if we will obey what Yeshua says to do, this tree here is going to turn into this tree right here. And this is our prayer for the house of Ephraim, that we can take seriously the words of our Elohim in these end times, to give him the organization he says he wants, to give him the stick of Joseph in the hand of Ephraim that will move Judah to jealousy, because we're keeping Elohim's commandments better than brother Judah's keeping them. And you hear from the Ephraimites all the time, oh, no, well, we keep it better just because we believe in Yeshua. But then they don't keep the commandments. They don't tithe. They don't organize. They don't have discipline. There is no court system. There is no way to adjudicate disputes. But you're keeping it better, even though you're not keeping it at all. Are we sure that's not just fooling ourselves? This is the prophecy, brethren. Yechezkel 37 and verse 16. Judah already took a stick. Judah's already back in the land. Do we want to take a stick? Brethren, do we want to go back to the land? How much do we want to go back to the land? Do we want to go back to the land enough to obey Yeshua? Brethren, 90% of us are not going to choose Yeshua. 90% of us are not going to make it home. But there will be a 10% remnant of us who will want to do everything Yeshua says to do, to help build a nation, to help establish the kind of brotherhood Elohim has always wanted on this earth. And the rest will perish. I pray that will not be any one of us listening to this broadcast. Brothers, the thing Yeshua says to do, he says to seek first the kingdom of Elohim and his righteousness. That means our driving goal when we get up should be to establish his kingdom. And if we will do that, he will give us everything else that we need. He'll give us the food, he'll give us the clothing, he'll give us the money, he'll give us whatever we need to serve him, whatever we need to build his son's kingdom. So we put first things first, knowing that at the end of the day, we're going to go stand in the judgment. But brethren, how many of us have other priorities? How many of us are going to do something other than seeking first the kingdom of Elohim? How many of us are going to think we're serving Elohim with all of our heart, mind, and soul, but we don't do anything for him? We don't have any time for him. We don't have any money for him. Well, brothers, all these things are coming down, and Yahweh knows who's going to survive and who's not going to survive. My prayer is that each and every one of you will choose to survive by choosing this day to serve Yahweh and to keep all of his commandments and to put his commandments first. And if there's anything in our lives that stops us or hinders us or gets in the way of us fulfilling his commandments, then may Elohim please help us to reorder our lives. And on this Sabbath day, just ask each and every one of us to take 7 minutes to just sit and ask ourselves, are we really keeping all of Elohim's commandments? Or are there things that we're not yet doing? because we need to be keeping all of his commandments to survive what's coming up. Shabbat Shalom.